On the cusp of spring in 1908, the rolling hills of rural Kentucky seemed as eternal and unchangeable as the earth itself. In Idle Springs, a town so small it barely clung to the railroad that had once promised prosperity, each day echoed the one before, marked by the rhythm of sunrise, labor, supper, and sleep. Farms stitched the land into a patchwork of green and brown, dotted with barns whose red paint had long since faded, and homes that creaked with every passing year. This quiet world of worn-out fields and cautious routine rarely demanded attention from the outside. No one expected that, in a matter of days, every silence would crack and every shadow would seem to move with new intent. This is not folklore, not hearsay. These are details rescued from reports, letters, and diaries hidden for decades, accounts buried in dust and deliberately forgotten. This is the Ferris family case, the story that Idle Springs tried to erase, a story of fear, suspicion, and choices that echo far beyond the boundaries of a single home. The rain that night arrived without warning, sweeping cold across the ridges and wrapping the Ferris farmhouse in a restless shroud of wind. Lightning crossed the low clouds, illuminating the rickety porch and silvering the acres of corn stubble that ran to the creek. In such weather, no sensible person wandered far from shelter. The Ferris family, like their neighbors, kept the lamps low and doors locked, eyes drifting from old newspapers to the windows rattling in their frames. Thomas Ferris, broad-shouldered and prematurely aged, sat at the kitchen table, sleeves rolled and jaw set. Bills, more of them and increasingly merciless, formed a crooked pile near his elbow. The Ferris land, though once thriving, had suffered under 2 years of failed harvests. Thomas's hands, marked with calluses and half-healed scars, traced the columns of numbers with growing resignation. His wife, Martha, moved quietly between the stove and the counter, the familiar ache in her back distracting her from the tingling in her nerves. She, like most farmers' wives, knew how to endure, how to patch a shirt a 4th time, how to stretch potatoes through winter. But a feeling had settled around the house that spring, a foreboding she couldn't explain, a sense that something had gone wrong nearby and was somehow circling closer. Upstairs, 12-year-old Henry tried to focus on his arithmetic homework, while Samuel, just a year younger, picked at the remains of a slingshot, hoping to coax it back to life. Their room was a crowded gallery of patched clothes, scavenged books, and the dreams of boys who wanted little more than adventure and a long summer free from chores. On the woven rag rug between their beds, 6-year-old Lily Ferris created her own universe with colored pencil, drawing fields fatter with corn and skies more reliably blue than any they'd ever seen. The night wore on with the slow certainty of Kentucky time. The distant sound of thunder rolled over the hills. Livestock shifted uneasily in the barn. The Ferris family gathered for supper, cornbread, beans, the last of the autumn preserves. Conversation was sparse, broken by the sounds of rain on the roof and the mechanical tick of the wall clock. Then, just as Thomas rose to stoke the dying fire, it happened. 3 sharp knocks, not the uncertain tapping of a neighbor, not the wind dragging a branch. Deliberate, measured, each one echoing with the promise of trouble. Martha's heart dropped. She looked at Thomas, who hesitated only a moment before retrieving the shotgun kept behind the door. The air felt suddenly electrified, as if the entire house were holding its breath. Henry and Samuel clambered to peek downstairs, curiosity warring with the wisdom to stay put, while Lily pressed her hands to her ears, wide eyes darting from shadow to shadow. Thomas cracked the door, lantern held high. Rain spattered his boots, and the wind dragged the scent of grass and river into the threshold. On the porch stood a stranger, tall, shoulders squared against the storm, a brimmed hat shadowing his features. Drops raced down his overcoat, pooling near his feet. The stranger didn't introduce himself. Instead, his voice emerged, a gravelly whisper, forced to steadiness by urgency. "Whose land am I standing on?" The question, so odd and abrupt, seemed to slow the night itself. Thomas answered, almost out of habit, "The Ferris family's." The man cut his gaze back down the dark road behind him. "You have something here that don't belong." With one swift motion, he pressed a battered envelope into Thomas's hand. "Open only when trouble finds you." Before Thomas could protest, before Martha, watching from behind, could demand the stranger's name, the man turned and strode off the porch. His footsteps vanished into the churn of rain and the whisper of wind sweeping the fields. Only after the man's outline dissolved into darkness did Thomas close the door. He stared down at the envelope in his palm, thick paper smudged with mud, the flap sealed with old wax. Across the back, in a hurried scrawl, "For the Ferris family. Do not trust anyone." Martha, trembling, pressed him. "Who was that? Did you see his face?" But the stranger's features were already slipping away, lost to fear and uncertainty. The children drifted downstairs one by one, summoned by the tension in their parents' voices. Around the kitchen table, the Ferris family argued what to do. Martha wanted to destroy the envelope, burn it before any curse or bad luck could take root. "People bring trouble on themselves, Tom. We have enough without borrowing more." Samuel, voice cracking but determined, insisted they keep it. What if there's money or a secret, or help? But it was neither greed nor curiosity that compelled Thomas. It was caution. Against his own instincts, he slid the envelope beneath a loose drawer panel, atop the stack of bills no one could pay. The storm abated, but the Ferris house didn't loosen. Martha checked every lock twice before sending the children to bed. Lily wept until sleep finally took her. Henry and Samuel whispered late into the night, trying to conjure possible explanations. None of them realistic, but all of them terrifying. Silence pressed thickly around the farmhouse. Occasionally wind scraped the window shoots. A shutter banged loose on the barn. In those cracks between sleep, Thomas, tired, scared, ashamed of his own fear, tried to convince himself that the worst he'd ever know was behind him. Poor crops, tired bones, and neighbors' gossip. He could not have imagined that this knock would unravel his family's history, strip Idle Springs of its small-town innocence, and send officials scrambling to erase the truth. As dawn crept over the hills, painting the fields golden gray, everything outwardly returned to normal. Chickens cluttered near the barn, Martha baked bread, Henry and Samuel were dispatched to fix the boundary fences. Yet beneath the surface, each family member moved as if wading through deeper water, alert to noises in the grass and whispers along the lane. No one spoke of the envelope, but no one let their guard down. Even strangers riding the train past Idle Springs noted that something had shifted. Less laughter at the store, eyes that darted away faster than before. The Ferris family's fate, and with it, the future of Idle Springs, had started its slow, irreversible spiral. The first step into the unknown had been taken, carrying with it the heavy question of who beyond the Ferrises already knew what the envelope contained. What the Ferrises did not yet understand was the true cost of secrets in a town built on silence, and how, by the end of this story, nothing and no one would ever be the same again. Dawn broke over Idle Springs with a veil of thin mist, painting the world in monochrome softness. To the casual observer, the Ferris farmhouse looked much the same as any other in Kentucky's countryside. Scratched porch, patched windows, tidy rows of morning tasks. But those who lived there sensed the weight of change in the air, heavy as wet linen. Inside, Martha stoked the stove, attempting to banish the chill and the thoughts that haunted her since the stranger's visit. She moved with restless purpose, brewing coffee so dark it bit the tongue, kneading dough that needed more hope than flour. Thomas, meanwhile, forced himself through routine, feeding chickens, fetching water, surveying the far field for signs of rot or trespass. The ground, soft from last night's downpour, squelched beneath his boots. Even the crows, usually brash, kept to the fence posts and watched silently. A sense of dread, so persistent it almost seemed corporeal, hovered above every chore. Henry and Samuel slunk to the boundary fence, tasked with mending wire but distracted by unspoken conspiracies. They spoke in code, half joking to mask the discomfort of the unknown. "Maybe the envelope has money in it," Henry whispered, his breath fogging in the cool air. "Or maybe it's a warning, something about our land they never wanted us to know." Samuel, more anxious, poked at the dirt around the fence posts for anything unusual, buried bottles, strange tracks, bits of metal. He found nothing but old nails and disappointment. Beyond the farthest row, the woods stared back, dense with oaks and secrets, as if they too had overheard last night's conversation. Inside, Lily remained close to Martha, her small hands fidgeting with colored pencils and half-finished drawings. She sensed trouble the way children do, wordlessly, almost instinctively, shrinking from opened windows and abrupt noises. Martha tried to keep her cheerful, but the tension in the house infected every word. After breakfast, Thomas called the family together. No one mentioned the envelope, not directly, but its presence ruled every glance, every silence. "We keep to ourselves," he said. "No talk of strangers, no gossip. Idle Springs turns trouble into rumors faster than we can stamp it out." The family agreed, understanding that secrecy was both shield and burden. Later, neighbors arrived to barter eggs and stories, their eyes sharp, and their talk pointed toward last night's storm. Miss Cora Lawson, a widow who lived 2 properties over, lingered longer than usual. She asked Martha in a voice not quite casual, "Did anyone come knocking last night?" Martha's face betrayed little, but her hands shook slightly as she washed a cup. "No, storm was loud. We didn't hear a thing." Cora's gaze lingered skeptical. Rumors in Idle Springs were like mold, spreading quickly, impossible to kill completely. The Ferrises knew that even a stray word could shape suspicion for years. Still, Cora left, her buggy rattling up the hill, and Martha counted each step she took as proof that secrecy, at least for today, would hold. The rest of the day followed the clock's slow cycle. Noon brought thin sandwiches and bitter pickles, the kind preserved for lean times. Thomas traveled into town for feed, exchanging strained greetings with neighbors. The general store, usually a haven of friendly gossip, felt thick with subtext. Glances lingered, conversations slowed. He overheard snippets. Someone's field torn up after the rain, a dog gone missing. Whispers about a stranger glimpsed near the rail line. Outside the store, Thomas watched a pair of deputies talk with Old Man Harper, the town's unofficial historian and chief source of local tales. Harper's wild gestures pointed toward the highway, tracing the stranger's path out of town. The deputies appeared skeptical. Nothing in their posture suggested urgency, but Thomas noted it anyway, filing the information alongside his own worry. Back home, afternoon slid into evening. Martha hung laundry in the lengthening sun, her arms trembling from equal parts effort and fear. The boys, having grown bored of fence repair, wandered near the creek. They kicked pebbles and argued over the fastest shortcut through the woods, but every so often Henry scanned the tree line, expecting eyes to peer out from the brush. Lily sat at the edge of the porch, humming a tune only she remembered, sketching the sun with lines bold and uneven. Her picture that day was different. She'd drawn a house with high dark windows and a door obscured by shadow. Martha, noticing, asked gently, "Why did you draw it so dark?" Lily shrugged, not understanding the question herself. As daylight faded, another visitor arrived. This time it was Reverend Mayfield, a tall, thin man with a face carved by years of worry for other people's souls. He came bearing a basket of bread, a token of neighborly charity. His eyes, however, did not linger long on the kitchen table. Instead, he scanned the room, pausing at Thomas, then at the children, and most of all at the drawer that now hid the envelope. His conversation, friendly at first, soon grew heavier. "There's talk of a stranger, Tom," he said, his voice grave but measured. "People say he's looking for something, or someone. You folks need to be careful." Thomas nodded, forcing himself to appear unconcerned. "We haven't seen much except trouble these past few seasons. If it finds us again, we'll know what to do." The Reverend sighed, sensing resistance. "If you need anything, come to me. And whatever the trouble, don't let pride push your family into the dark. Our town has secrets, Tom. Some better left buried, but some that need light. That's the only way out." With that he left, footsteps steady, faith in his mission unshaken. Night crept up on Idle Springs before the Ferris family was ready. Martha set the table, laying out supper while Thomas checked every door and window. The envelope, untouched for hours, now seemed heavier in its hiding place, as if drawing the uncertainty into itself. Henry suggested they open it just to see, not to use but to understand. Samuel countered. Pa said wait for trouble, not curiosity. But what counted as trouble? The air in the house had grown so thick that every bump in the night, every howl of wind felt like a harbinger. Finally, without warning from the skies or the town, trouble arrived in the form of a letter slipped under the front door. No stamp, no sender, just 2 words hurriedly scrawled, "Get out." Thomas found it near midnight, after Martha had finally coaxed Lily to sleep. He picked up the note, examining the edges for signs of a familiar hand, and turned it over for answers he would not find. Instead, he tucked it inside his jacket, hoping the children wouldn't see. He knew, of course, that such hopes were always in vain. That night Thomas sat alone in the kitchen, staring out the window at nothing. He considered the chain of events. The rain, the knock, the envelope, the strangers passing in the dark, the cryptic warning left at his door. He thought of his family, the land, the legacy of hardships, and the long history of people who'd left Idle Springs with nothing but loss to show for it. Each memory, each fear, built on the next. Martha joined him briefly, her presence as soothing as the rhythm of her hand on his shoulder. They did not speak. Language, they'd learned, often failed in the face of genuine terror. As shadows in the yard lengthened and the corners of the farmhouse grew impossibly deep, Thomas made a decision. At dawn he would open the envelope, not because the trouble had finally arrived, but because the waiting, the not knowing, was changing everything. The Ferris family needed truth, no matter its shape. The coming morning would not grant peace, but it would offer clarity. And as Thomas listened to the stillness, broken only by Martha's breathing, by the distant call of a night bird, he braced himself for the next step into the darkness that would define their fate. In the silence, secrets multiplied and gathered strength, waiting for a new voice to bring them back into light. The Ferris farmhouse woke before dawn, shrouded in a hush so deep even the animals seemed quieted. Thomas lay in bed, his mind tracing the sharp edges of memory. The stranger's warning, the handwritten threat slid under the door, the weight of the envelope still hidden in the drawer. He thought of his children's faces, chiseled with worry, and of Martha's silent plea for normalcy she could no longer conjure. The house stirred with the slow certainty of another hard day. Martha moved about the kitchen, her actions deliberate, as if baking bread and boiling water might somehow ward away uncertainty. The boys clattered downstairs, voices cautious, their quarrels muted. Even Lily, usually buoyant at sunrise, seemed subdued, slipping pencils into her pocket, as if readying herself to sketch an answer to whatever question the world might throw. Thomas watched them each with a heart pounding steadier and harder, feeling the splintered burden of leadership, the need to protect, to decide. Facing the grey light of morning, he made his decision irrevocable. The time for waiting had ended. Whatever knowledge the envelope held, it might finally yield the meaning behind the pointed warnings, behind the stranger's words and the unease that haunted their land. When the clock above the mantel struck 7, Thomas beckoned the family to the kitchen. His voice, gruff from sleepless hours, left no room for debate. "We'll open it now," he said. Martha nodded, her face charged with conflicting relief and dread. Sam and Henry watched, eyes wide, peering at the mysterious document that had until now seemed almost mythic. Thomas emptied the loose drawer, retrieving the envelope with methodical care. He set it on the table where the morning's pale sunlight fell in a thin, uncertain shaft. For a moment nobody spoke. Martha reached out and gently rested her hand atop Thomas's, grounding him, as if the living bodies of his family might tether him to this moment, protect him from the past or the future. With a trembling finger, Thomas broke the brittle wax seal. The paper crackled as he unfolded the single sheet within. Its script was hurried and desperate, but precise enough to reveal a practiced hand. To the Ferris family, if morning finds me gone, know this. What you hold is not fortune, but proof. Proof of what happened on your land before you and why it can never be forgotten. You are not safe, but truth can defend where fear cannot. Trust no official, and trust no neighbor. If you do nothing, the cycle will continue. In town records, 3 deeds are missing from the history of this farm, 3 names erased, 3 lives stolen. Beware the one who asks about the well. Signed, John Abel, March 8, 1908. The family read in silence, the words soaking slowly into their skin. Sam, ever the first to speak, broke the spell. What does he mean, 3 lives stolen? What about the well? Even in daylight, the phrase sent a cold shiver down Martha's spine. Their well stood at the farthest edge of their land, its stones slick with moss and the shadow of old legends, the place children were told, half in jest, to avoid after sundown. Hadn't Henry once claimed he saw something move there just at dusk? If this is true, Martha murmured, then someone in Idle Springs, someone who knows our land better than we do, is hiding more than secrets. Thomas carefully folded the paper again, now staring at the kitchen wall, as if the years before them might suddenly materialize and offer an explanation. Whatever this means, "It changes nothing about who we are," he said, "but it might change what we need to do." Outside, the world carried on as usual. The rooster crowed, oblivious to the drama inside. Chickens claimed what little sun fought through the clouds, pecking between scrub and mud. The neighbors began their daily rounds, buggies cutting tracks in the lane, each routine gesture a reminder to the Ferrises of how much their lives differed, how apart they all felt in this moment of revelation. The family tried to continue as normal. Henry and Sam went to the well under the guise of fixing the loose stones. They watched for evidence, a ring etched in the ancient wood, a piece of cloth clinging to brambles, initials carved by a forgotten hand. They found only shadows, a brackish scent rising, a ripple on the surface, the echo of someone or something waiting. Back at the house, Martha sorted laundry with wooden hands, while Lily drew quiet pictures by the window. A house. Well, dark outlines sketched hard with the side of her pencil. Each picture grew more urgent. Each line seemed heavy, insistent, as if Lily's own unconscious remembered something her family could not. At midday, Thomas rode into town. The familiar main street, lined with its clapboard storefronts and faded signage, looked unchanged. But now every face in the store seemed to press a little closer, every greeting loaded with more than politeness. He saw the sheriff speaking with the town clerk, glancing in his direction, laughter coming just a beat too late. Gossip, as always, moved faster than fact. Still, Thomas acted the part of a man with nothing to hide. He bought flour, nails, a length of rope, chores mundane, conversation forced. It was the store's old ledgers, piled on the counter, that drew his lingering attention. He asked the clerk nonchalantly about the farm's history, but was met with shrugs, averted eyes, and the well-practiced records burned in the fire of '89, I'm afraid. Tom, ain't much left, only what folks remember, and what folks choose to forget. On the ride home, Thomas passed the graveyard on the hill, its headstones half swallowed by grass. 3 stones in the oldest row were unmarked, smaller than the rest. He slowed the horse, considering the patterns, the possibility that John Abel's warning was not simply hysteria, but fact rooted in Idle Springs' own silent consent. That afternoon, as storm clouds threatened, the family gathered again. Martha, wringing her hands in her apron, said it first. "If someone comes asking about the well, we mustn't answer. We keep to ourselves, but we cannot just wait." Talking it through, the plan became clear. Henry and Sam would search the well at dusk, when eyes elsewhere were most likely distracted. Martha would visit Cora under pretense, hoping to hear any town rumor about missing deeds, old crimes, or families that disappeared. Thomas would continue his careful inquiries in town, intent now on comparison, on truth, not comfort. That evening, the fields turned lavender and navy under the lowering sky. Henry and Sam approached the well, hiding tools under their jackets. The stones glistened, slick with the day's humidity. They lowered a length of rope and a pail, feeling for obstructions, for anything hidden beneath water. 30 feet down, they struck something, not soft, not yielding, something shaped, something that refused to move. A sense of dread, centuries old, rose up. The boys did not speak. They rushed back, breathless, to the house, reporting only, "There's something down there, Pa, not just water." That night, the Ferrises ate dinner in vigilant silence. Martha worried the hem of her apron. Lily hummed her strange, tuneless melody. Each family member watched the door, the windows, the well, as if all 4 boundaries might break at once. When darkness fell, Idle Springs glowed with the lanterns of its trusting townspeople, but the Ferris farm remained dark, shielded by secrecy and fear. As Thomas stared out across the fields, the words of John Abel kept repeating in his mind. 3 deeds, 3 names, 3 lives stolen. They'd waited too long. At last the Ferrises were caught between the past and what little hope for the future they still possessed. As midnight passed, wind rattled the windows, making the ancient nails groan in their frames. Somewhere out in the yard an animal cried, a sound somewhere between a plea and a warning. The Ferrises lay awake, each transported by worry, sleepless until the first grey light crept again over the Kentucky hills, knowing beyond any doubt that whatever secret they now shared could never be unlearned, and whatever danger watched from the darkness outside, time to act was running very thin. The next day dawned heavy with an oppressive silence, unlike any the Ferris family had ever experienced. The first rays of sun seemed to struggle to break through the thick hanging clouds, as if even the sky itself braced for something momentous. From the moment Thomas put his boots to the floorboards, sleep long banished, every step of the family felt slower, more deliberate, each movement shadowed by the weight of what was hidden beneath their land. Wordless glances replaced idle talk at the breakfast table. Henry's eyes darted between his father and the window. Samuel picked at his food but hardly ate. Martha drank bitter coffee, her palms pressed hard together. Lily clung to her crayon, her knuckles white, sketching spirals across the edge of the tablecloth, as if drawing might tether her to safety. After breakfast, Martha set off toward Cora Lawson's property, her visit an excuse to probe for fresh gossip. Cora met Martha at the fence, her distance unusually guarded. They exchanged neighborly pleasantries, but Martha quickly bent the conversation. "You ever known anybody take a real interest in our wells out this way?" Martha asked, her tone casual. For a moment Cora's expression flickered, surprise, then discomfort, then something hardening behind her eyes. "Folks here know to leave old things rest. Wells, fields, family squabbles, it all sinks into the dirt sooner or later." She glanced past Martha as if searching for eavesdroppers. "If you care for your kin, don't let 'em dig too deep. Sometimes what comes up can't be put back down." With that, she excused herself, leaving Martha to walk home alone, the chill of new discomfort riding up her spine. Meanwhile, Henry and Sam, unable to contain their nervous curiosity, returned to the well as soon as chores allowed. They brought a lantern and borrowed their father's crowbar, determined to uncover whatever they'd struck the night before. Sam lowered the lantern, its flame flickering as it descended, casting long shadows on the ancient stone. When it touched the water, the dim light revealed the surface littered with leaves and debris, but in its center, just beneath, a dark, foreign shape interrupted the long-time reflection. It was unmistakably unnatural, yet worn by age and the embrace of the earth. They tried to haul the object up with the bucket, working together, muscles burning with anxiety and resolve. After several failed attempts, the bucket caught on something solid. Slowly, hand over hand, they pulled. The object broke the surface with a sucking sound and swung heavily as water streamed away, revealing the sharp corner of a battered wooden box, iron strapped about the size of a small trunk, and, clinging to its top, a rusted padlock that had long since given itself up to the elements. Henry and Sam stared at the box as if it might leap up and bite them. "Should we open it?" Sam whispered, heart in his throat. Henry shook his head. "Pa should see it first." They heaved the box to solid ground, mud sloughing from its sides, then dragged it with difficulty all the way back to the house, leaving a furrowed path in the wet morning grass. Inside, Thomas's reaction was immediate and grave. He dismissed Lily to the parlor and shooed Martha from the stove. Without a word, he fetched his hammer and a chisel from the barn and set to work on the rusted clasp. Each strike echoed through the house, thudding to the rhythm of generations past. Finally the lock snapped. The lid creaked open, exhaling a scent of mildew, oil, and something far older. Inside, carefully wrapped oilcloths concealed a sheaf of papers, old legal documents, their script almost illegible, and a thin leather notebook. Beneath them, in a shallow wooden tray, lay several objects: a corroded gold ring, a child's shoe, stained and warped, and a rosary, its beads discolored almost black. There was also a folded photograph, its edges curling from decades spent in darkness. The image, faded and grainy, showed 3 children posed in front of a farmhouse not unlike their own, their faces wide-eyed, unsmiling. Thomas's hands shook as he sorted through the box. The deeds matched what the letter described: 3 records, all signed the same month in 1887, all transferred with a stamp of a judge, whose name Thomas vaguely recalled from Sunday sermons as a child. The names on the paperwork were not Ferris, nor any name that now lived in Idle Springs. These were families erased by ink and time. The Hartfields, the Lowens, the Cooks. Martha, reading over his shoulder, gasped as she recognized the address. "This is our land. Hartfield Road, Lowen Farm, the old Cook property. They're all pieces of what we live on." Thomas opened the notebook. The first page was quick to the point. "If found, know that this record is truth. Our home was taken, each of us forced away or worse. They offered money, emptied our barn, then locked the past below ground. Do not let their story stand. Do not drink the water. Do not trust the peace they promise. What they did to us, they will do again. He read the words aloud, his voice trembling. What they did to us, they will do again. The phrase fell on silent ears, and for a long time, no one in the Ferris family moved. A storm began to build in the west, dark clouds rolling over the ridgeline, repeating the cycle that had begun this very story. Martha moved to close the shutters as wind whipped dust into the house. Lily, forgetting that she had been sent away, pressed her nose to the parlor door, watching the adults study artifacts of loss and forced absence, trying to piece together what had happened on their land, to their neighbors, so many years before. The afternoon was consumed in whispered arguments. Martha wanted to take the documents to the sheriff, but Thomas resisted, John Abel's warning fresh in his mind. He said, "Trust no official," and I believe him. Someone in this town benefits from forgetting. Why else would all these records disappear? For every suggestion Martha made, for leaving, for publishing the truth, for confronting the town, Thomas countered with caution. We need proof and we need allies. But until we know who erased these families, any move could destroy us. Supper passed in agitation. The family ate the meal as if in a trance, aware that their world had begun to rotate around a secret heavier than their crops or their debt. When night arrived, it brought with it fresh worries. The possibility that those who once stole land and erased lives might still be near, ready to finish what they had started. As thunder rolled across the valley, Henry caught movement near the well, a fleeting shape gone too quickly to identify. He locked every door and watched the windows, listening for footsteps beneath the roar of rain. Martha tucked Lily in for the night, her voice trembling but even. "You're safe," she whispered. "You're safe." But outside, in the swollen dark, the Ferris family understood that safety was as fleeting as the names scribbled out on those old deeds, and as fragile as the paper that recorded lives meant to be forgotten. Before bed, Thomas gathered the family. "Tomorrow we go to see Reverend Mayfield. He's never let a secret go when justice was at stake. If there's anyone left in this place who wants the truth, it's him. But tonight, we do not open the door, no matter who knocks." As the house settled and the storm surged, each family member braced themselves for a vigil that would last until the first hint of dawn. Secrets once unearthed refused to rest. Down in the kitchen, the old box sat in the center of the table, between the cooling lamp and the ledger of unpaid bills, a tiny, silent monument to the forgotten, and a warning to those tempted by silence. Beneath the pounding rain, Idle Springs slept uneasily, and the Ferris family learned that sometimes the truth dug out of the well brings more questions than answers, and the promise that the greatest dangers were still to come. First light surfaced as little more than a pale smear along the horizon, bathing Idle Springs in cold mist and making the Ferris farmhouse look smaller, almost diminished under the weight of new knowledge. The previous night's storm had torn branches from the oldest trees and pressed a deep silty mud into the paths leading from the well to the barn. The family woke exhausted, nerves frayed by the endless rumble of thunder and strange footsteps imagined at every window. Their kitchen, once the warm heart of the home, had become a war room. The battered wooden box sat in the center of the table, its contents sorted into uneven piles. Deeds, the faded photograph, the ring, the little shoe, and the blackened rosary. Each object vibrated with questions, none of them offering comfort or clarity. After a breakfast left nearly untouched, Thomas stood and nodded to Martha. "Today we go to see Reverend Mayfield." The plan, simple yet fraught with alarm, felt necessary. They could not be certain of the sheriff or any neighbor, but something in Thomas's memory insisted the Reverend stood apart from the tangled roots of the town's old crimes. The boys offered to stay at home with Lily, but Thomas refused. "We go as a family. Whatever's been buried here, it's ours now, all of ours." Martha bundled Lily in her coat, despite the late spring sun, and the family set out together, the evidence of their past packed neatly in a flour sack. Clutched tight against Thomas's chest, Idle Springs' church squatted atop a gentle rise above the main street, its spire stark against the brooding sky. To the Ferrises, the climb felt like an admission, the approach to someone who might, by his own wisdom or conscience, force the bones of the town's story into new alignment. Reverend Mayfield met them at the door, his face slack with fatigue but open, searching, The children settled into stiff pews while Martha and Thomas, their posture rigid with apprehension, approached the old man with the sack. "We need your help," Thomas said simply. He emptied the sack onto the desktop, the items tumbling with a finality impossible to misinterpret. The Reverend listened closely as Thomas described the knock in the storm, the stranger's envelope, the warnings, the discoveries at the well. Martha added her suspicion, Cora Lawson's veiled warnings, the cautious hush that had settled each time she inquired about the land's history. Reverend Mayfield picked up each deed, reading over the names, his brow furrowing as the years peeled themselves back. Hartfield, Lowen, Cook. These names are not unknown to me, but they're not spoken either. I remember old stories, whispered fears when I first arrived. They say the land remembers more than the living do. When he examined the photograph, the 3 unsmiling children before the old farmhouse, a muscle jumped in his cheek. That's the Hartfield girl, if I'm not mistaken. She would have been 7 that year, just before the family left after what happened in '87. Martha's voice quivered. What happened? The Reverend looked away. The town always said they left in the night. Most said bankruptcy, others something worse. No one ever talked about the missing children, the missing records. Those are the stories passed in shivers rather than in church. The ones that never find daylight. The Ferris pressed. Why was this covered up? And why the warning now after all these years? Mayfield hesitated. Land here has always been something to fight for. In the drought of '87, men did terrible things to hold on. Forged records, paid off sheriffs, made deals in the dark. Hartfield's land changed hands 3 times before it became Ferris property, and each time something was erased. Men who should have gone to jail became pillars of the church. The honest ones left, or worse, simply disappeared. He gently touched the rosary, then the shoe, his expression grave. These families were destroyed for profit, for pride. Your family sits on the last link in a chain the town never wanted pulled. A heavy silence fell. Even Lily, sensing the seriousness, watched the adults with wide, unblinking eyes. Thomas leaned forward. We have to act. But who can we trust? The Reverend considered this. Bringing the sheriff in could be dangerous. If Abel's warning is right, some in authority have as much to lose as the guilty who are long dead. He stroked his chin. But there is the county office in Somerset. Their records, if any survived the fire, might have copies of deeds. And there's Ruth Deming, the widow who keeps all the church records. She's the only one left from those days. She never forgot a name or a face. They made a plan. Martha and the boys would visit Ruth Deming to ask about anything she remembered concerning the Hartfields. Lowens or Cooks, Thomas and Reverend Mayfield would travel to Somerset on the pretense of purchasing supplies, to comb through whatever dusty ledgers still survived in the courthouse basement. Before they left, Thomas turned to the Reverend. Why did you help us? Mayfield's gaze was unwavering, because justice, even delayed a lifetime, is not bested by silence. I've buried too many secrets in this land. The first thread of hope crept into the Ferris family's lives, thin but real. Back at home, Martha and the children walked up the shaded lane to Ruth Deming's weathered cottage. Ruth, well into her 80s, answered the door with suspicious eyes but warmed when Martha introduced herself and explained the family's connection to the land. Ruth ushered them in, her kitchen fragrant with mint and pipe smoke. She listened as Martha described the deeds in the well, her hands twisting a handkerchief. I remember Hartfield's girl, Ruth whispered. She went missing that spring. Her father lost his mind, blamed the mill owner, but nobody did a thing. It was as if she melted. And the Lowens, they were gone overnight, left letters no one cared to read, said the well was wicked. The town got quiet after that. Letters and prayers are all that's left. She rummaged in an old trunk, producing a frayed ledger. In its pages she pointed to entries, marriages, deaths, sudden disappearances. Names lined through, remarks in tight script. Moved, no known address, see Judge Harlow. Each cross out a tiny funereal for a life the town no longer claimed. At that same moment, Thomas and Reverend Mayfield reached the courthouse in Somerset. The clerk, busy with new property cases, waved them toward the ledgers. Hours passed in silence, the air thick with dust. At last, Thomas found what he sought, a copy of the 1887 transaction, notarized but with amendments in another hand, initials matching the notorious Judge Harlow. The record noted an anonymous cash payment and, oddest of all, the signature of a witness whose name had been blotted out by ink spilled deliberately. As dusk fell, the family regrouped, each carrying pieces of history and horror. At the dinner table, a sense of resolve grew. "We're too close now to pretend ignorance," Martha said. "Either we finish this or it finishes us." That night, the Ferris farmhouse glowed with lamplight late into the night. Their world, once reduced to routine and hardship, now pulsed with dangerous questions and a cautious optimism. That truth, finally, might crack the silence built over decades. Outside, the wind rose once more, bending the shadows in the yard, but inside, the Ferrises stood together, a family now unwilling, ever again, to let what was taken remain lost. The following morning unraveled with a palpable tension, as if Idle Springs itself sensed a shifting tide beneath its surface. For the Ferris family, routine gave way to preparation. Their home, for decades a fortress of modest dreams and everyday labors, now stood as both shield and vessel for a brewing reckoning. Ash-grey clouds pressed low over the fields, the air charged and restless. Thomas rose before daylight. Sleep was a fading luxury, and each sound beyond the pane set his pulse hammering. He reviewed everything they'd gathered: the box from the well, the faded deeds, Ruth's ledger, and the newly photocopied courthouse records. His resolve had crystallized into something hard and precise. Today they would share what they knew, not with the sheriff, not with the storekeeper, but directly with those who mattered. The handful in Idle Springs with memory long enough and conscience deep enough to understand what had been lost. Martha agreed instantly. She dressed with certainty, her hands steady, her eyes sharper than ever. After a quick breakfast, Thomas sent Henry and Sam into town to invite Reverend Mayfield, Ruth Deming, and even Cora Lawson, whose guarded warnings suggested she knew more than she let slip. Lily watched from the window, drawing swirling grey shapes, sensing a world both larger and darker than her years could grasp. The meeting was set for midday. As the Ferrises made preparations, Martha kept glancing at the yard, watching for signs. Thomas locked every window, feeling the pressure of what might happen if their plan was discovered. The boys returned with confirmation. All had agreed, though Cora's acceptance was delivered with a furrowed brow and an uneasy promise. "I'll hear you, but you better know what you're stirring up." Noon arrived with little fanfare, a lull in the wind. Muted sunlight on the farmhouse, nervous footsteps on the porch. The guests settled around the battered table, Reverend Mayfield's posture rigid with anticipation, Ruth Deming clutching her ledger, Cora Lawson's jaw set in uneasy defiance. The Ferris family waited as Thomas laid out each piece of evidence and finally recounted the entire story. The stranger in the rain, the warning, the threat, the box, the deeds, the photograph, the records that burned, and the families who vanished. "We believe our land was stolen from 3 families, not through mistake or misfortune, but through malice, and the guilty or their kin have walked this town as trusted friends ever since." He did not embellish, did not demand belief. Instead, he offered what could be weighed and judged: the artifacts, the records, the testimony of Ruth, and the memories pieced together of wrongs never atoned for. A silence, profound and uneasy, fell over the table as each person measured the consequences of truth. Reverend Mayfield replied first. "I thought I'd seen all Idle Springs had to hide, but every year I've preached here, it seemed the land withheld something deeper. We must bring this to the town." Ruth Deming nodded. "If you want the names remembered, it starts here. I'll write to the county, to the papers. I'm old, they can't silence me without a fight." Cora Lawson, arms folded tightly, hesitated. "You need to be careful. People here protect their own, even when the stories burn through generations. There are those who'll do anything to keep quiet. I'll help. My family has lived near that well longer than anyone. I'll testify if you need." The alliance was sealed not with any vow, but with the certainty of shared responsibility. The Ferrises understood the risks: ostracism, reprisal, the endless war between truth and comfort, but found strength in unity, in the joining of memory and justice. The plan formed quickly. That weekend, the group would schedule a public meeting at the church. Ruth would collect all surviving records and stories. Reverend Mayfield would craft a sermon around the idea of remembrance and restitution. The Ferris family would bring the artifacts, the box, the documents, the photograph, and speak plainly of what they'd endured and discovered. The rest of the day became a sprint of preparation. Even as news began to leak, whispers in the store, wary glances from neighbors, the Ferrises pressed on. Although Martha braced herself for the isolation to come, she was steadied by the sense of purpose filling the house, a sense that justice no longer felt impossible. Henry and Sam spent the afternoon in the barn, writing careful lists of questions to ask about the Hartfield, Lowen, and Cook families. Lily, sitting beneath the window, drew a picture of the well surrounded by smiling faces, her child's hope defying the gloom. Late in the afternoon, Thomas received the first sign of resistance. Two men from town, a deputy and a local merchant, arrived on horseback, faces masked by politeness. They asked about the sudden interest in old town records, the gathering scheduled for Sunday, the Ferris family's newfound curiosity. Thomas kept his reply neutral, refusing to give details, but the message was obvious. Someone had heard, and someone was unsettled. The men left with stiff nods, but Martha watched them ride away, her arms wrapped around Lily, knowing Idle Springs had always punished those who broke silence. Still, neither she nor Thomas wavered. That evening, the Ferris home glowed with anticipation and unease. Martha set a large meal to bolster the family's courage. Thomas reviewed the plan with everyone, explaining that no matter what happened, they would face it together. When dusk fell dark and swirling, the family gathered at the kitchen table, Ruth, Cora, and Reverend Mayfield joining hands with the Ferrises. Each spoke, sharing what they remembered, what remained unspoken, what they wished for the town to become. Outside, a restless wind bent the grass. Inside, a flicker of resolve grew steadily brighter. By midnight, Martha checked every lock. Thomas prayed for courage. The children, exhausted but unafraid, listened to the adults talk late into the night, stories and strategy weaving into the dawn. In the heart of Idle Springs, for the first time in decades, the truth waited not to be buried but to be revealed. Sunday morning arrived cloaked in a strange mix of apprehension and hope. The Ferris farmhouse was unusually silent, but the tension inside was palpable, the calm before a confrontation that felt as old as the town itself. The sky above Idle Springs was overcast, neither threatening rain nor promising much sunlight, as if nature itself awaited the coming verdict. Martha dressed the children in their best clothes, smoothing Lily's braids and making small talk that belied her nerves. Thomas double-checked the box and the documents, packing everything with ritual precision. Reverend Mayfield arrived early, walking the muddy lane in solemn determination, Ruth Deming trailing behind with her ledger held like a shield. Just after 10, the Ferrises made their way to the church. Its tiny sanctuary, usually barely filled for services, buzzed with whispers and wary faces drawn by the rumors that had crept through town all week. Some, like Cora Lawson, entered with their chins lifted, their presence a statement. Others arrived with furtive glances, stoked by equal parts curiosity and fear. Thomas placed the box at the front of the sanctuary, alongside the deeds and photograph, symbols of both accusation and petition. Reverend Mayfield waited until the seats were filled, then stood before the congregation, the usual warmth of his tone replaced by solemn urgency. He began not with scripture, but with history. We are a town built on memory of hardship, of triumph, of loss. Today we gather to remember those whose stories were taken from us. There are wounds in Idle Springs that have never healed, not because we cannot, but because we have not tried. He passed the floor to Ruth Deming, who recounted in painstaking detail the records she'd preserved, lists of marriages and deaths, letters of sudden departures, ledger lines drawn through names that should never have been forgotten. She spoke of the Hartfield girl's disappearance and of the midnight flight of the Lowens. She read aloud the hastily written testimony from John Abel, preserved by the Ferrises, revealing the forced transfers, the intimidation, the signatures erased from town memory. Thomas then stepped forward, his back straight with resolve. He told the story of the stranger in the rain, the warning envelope, the discoveries at the old well. He displayed the artifacts, deeds stamped by Judge Harlow, the faded photograph, each token of what was lost. He spoke not in anger but in mourning, appealing to the conscience of the community. He asked only for recognition of truth and for action to prevent such erasure ever again. A hush gripped the room, broken only by the sound of Lily's pencil across her sketchbook, a child's simple drawing of 3 houses joined by a winding path. At first, the congregation responded with silence. Gossip had hardened many hearts, and memory, it seemed, was not always a comfort. Then Cora Lawson rose, lending her voice to the plea. "My family lived on that road since before the railroad. My grandmother remembered Hartfield's girl, and the stories told to scare us into obedience. We are not less safe because we remember. We are less safe because we forget." Gradually more voices joined, some halting, some certain. A farmer recalled rumors of missing children. A seamstress recounted how papers vanished from the courthouse after every fire. The schoolteacher described how she'd been warned never to teach the old names. Tension mounted as the sheriff appeared, arms folded, his badge shining under the lantern light. He questioned the evidence, pushing back against the narrative of guilt. Thomas held his ground, refusing to retreat or threaten, insisting only on the facts laid out before everyone. Reverend Mayfield intervened. "We do not seek punishment for those long gone. We seek healing, a chance for the truth to be spoken. A town built on lies will never know peace. A town that remembers can finally find it." From the back, Ruth Deming, her hand shaking, stood and declared, "I am old enough to be buried here soon. I will not leave you with silence. What the Ferrises found is real. Let us record it. Let us honor the lost." A consensus began to form, not for vengeance but for remembrance and restitution. The sheriff was compelled, under town and county law, to file the new evidence, placing the Hartfields, Lowens, and Cooks back into the official histories. Plans were made to mark the old cemetery stones, to consecrate the land taken, and to publish the story in the Somerset paper. Yet even as the congregation dispersed, proud and uncertain, a note of resistance persisted. Some townspeople left without speaking, a minority determined to protect the old order, threatened by the surfacing of secrets. The Ferrises knew what this meant. In Idle Springs, truth was a beginning, not an ending. Back home, the family gathered, exhausted but relieved. Martha comforted Lily, who asked if the children in the photograph could come home now. Sam and Henry debated what justice might look like: an apology, a repaired grave, a story spoken without shame. Thomas and Martha met eyes across the quiet kitchen, sharing a sense of victory tinged by caution. "We've started something," Martha whispered, "and we can't know where it ends." That night the Ferrises sat in the lamplight, joining hands as they had the day before. The past was no longer hidden in boxes or beneath water. It lived now on paper, in memory, in the stones soon marked with real names. Justice was neither complete nor easy, but for the first time, Idle Springs had chosen to remember rather than forget. Outside, the grass stood tall after the storm, and the wind carried away the dust of secrets long repressed. The reckoning was not just for the Ferris family. It was for everyone who called Idle Springs home. The aftermath of the church meeting lingered in every corner of Idle Springs. The decision to admit a past of stolen land and vanished families rippled outward, not as loud scandal, but as subtle change. Some remained skeptical, clinging to comfort and tradition, but most found themselves talking quietly in kitchens and at fence lines, weighing what they'd learned against everything they'd believed. For the Ferris family, the transition was both liberating and unsettling. On Monday morning, Thomas woke before sunrise, his thoughts restless but lighter. The box, once hidden beneath a century of silence, now rested in plain view, its artifacts waiting for final restitution. Martha spent long hours writing letters to the courthouse, tracing the genealogy of the Hartfields, Lowens, and Cooks, determined to resurrect lines erased by old greed and new indifference. Henry and Sam, emboldened by their part in the discovery, walked to school with renewed purpose. Their classmates were curious, neither shunning nor celebrating the Ferris boys, but testing out the new story as if it were a riddle. "Is it true there are families left who never returned?" one asked. "Do you think anyone will come back?" The boys answered honestly. Some stories beg for closure, but closure rarely comes quickly. Lily, quieter than usual, drew all day at the kitchen table, her artwork filled with old wells and homes surrounded by sunlight. Martha praised her diligence, knowing that these sketches, innocent as they looked, were her youngest's way of processing sorrow and hope. In the center of town, Reverend Mayfield prepared for a second meeting, this time convening elders, the sheriff, and the schoolteacher, to plan the ceremonial marking of the lost graves. Ruth Deming, energy burning anew, dug through church archives and personal trunks, unearthing names, Maud Hartfield, Susanna Lowen, Isaac Cook, and matching them to addresses now either vanished or standing under the Ferris family's eaves. As days passed, the town's attitude shifted. The sheriff, bound by law and by conscience, drafted official reports to correct the history in county records. He personally visited the old graveyard, his boots sinking in the damp soil, and drove metal stakes where the old stones stood. Each stake held a temporary card: Hartfield, Lowen, Cook, no longer unknown but newly acknowledged. With the Ferris family's help, he set about gathering information for proper markers, seeking approval from distant relatives found through letters and courthouse queries. Some neighbors came forward with forgotten heirlooms, photographs, letters, even recipes that had belonged to families pushed out by the events of 1887. Cora Lawson delivered an antique quilt to Martha, patches stitched with hearts and initials from the Hartfields. "My grandmother kept this," she said, "through years of quiet protest. Maybe now it belongs with the truth." Martha accepted, weeping, her gratitude too deep for words. Meanwhile, whispers of opposition still drifted through the general store. The merchant who'd first questioned Thomas grew silent, suddenly concerned with his own property lines. A few others dismissed the church's gathering as stirring up old pain, preferring daily routine to justice. But these voices grew softer as the week wore on. A formal ceremony was planned for Sunday. Reverend Mayfield insisted everyone contribute: a stone, a story, a memory. Ruth wrote a speech. The Ferris boys crafted a wooden cross for the Hartfield daughter never returned, and Lily drew placards to decorate each new grave. Martha delivered fresh bread and quilts, stitched with the names of those lost but now returned to history. On the day of the ceremony, clouds drifted overhead but rain held off. The entire town and a handful of visitors from neighboring counties gathered in the old graveyard. The Ferrises led a small procession, carrying the trunk from the well and the photograph of 3 unsmiling children. Reverend Mayfield spoke of remembrance and forgiveness, not as the end of the story, but as a much-needed beginning. One by one, the artifacts from the box were laid out, the deeds wrapped in oilcloth, the ring placed on Maud Hartfield's headstone, the shoe at the foot of Susanna Lowen's grave, the rosary handed to Isaac Cook's great-granddaughter, who'd come at the last minute, hope and grief mingling in her embrace. Ruth Deming read passages from the old ledger, recounting how many times lives were crossed out to keep the land safe, each story building toward the shared promise that Idle Springs would never again bury the truth to keep its eye. Peace. Children placed flowers and stones on the new markers. Parents recited prayers. Thomas thanked everyone who had risked comfort for justice. Martha, voice trembling, told the crowd, "For years we thought we lived alone here, but now we know we are witnesses. We are the keepers of memory." When the final marker was set, Lily approached the well, holding her drawing of 3 houses winding together. She set it beneath the stones, the colored paper flapping gently in the wind. As the ceremony ended, the crowd lingered. Quiet conversations bloomed. New friendships formed between families linked now by a common, painful, but necessary history. The Ferrises, once outsiders by circumstance, now found themselves central in the renewed life of the town. That evening, Idle Springs glowed in the fading sunlight, changed in ways subtle and profound. The land, long weighed down by unfinished stories, opened itself once more to honest memory. The forgotten names had returned, and with them, the promise that silence would never again outlast truth. In the weeks following the ceremony, the energy that once bound the Ferris family in fear was replaced by a persistent hum of reflection and cautious optimism. Idle Springs, forever altered, moved slower, as if the air itself needed to reconcile with the shift, a town long ruled by secrets, learning the cost and the blessing of memory restored. The Ferrises tried to ease into their routines, though nothing felt truly familiar. Thomas returned to the fields, his task steadier, his burdens at least named. The old well, once a source of dread, now stood as a kind of monument. Its role in the story cemented, but its darkness finally dispersed. Periodically, he'd find people at the edge of the property, neighbors, visitors from Somerset, curious townsfolk, each stopping to pay respects or simply to acknowledge the significance of the place. He greeted them all with a silent nod, accepting his family's changed standing. Martha, newly esteemed among the townsfolk for her courage and her careful stewardship of the truth, was asked to join the church committee and even to help preserve local history. She accepted, tentatively at first, finding new purpose in the work. In her kitchen, she spent mornings writing letters and afternoons welcoming those who brought fragments of their own long-buried ancestry, stories of struggle, of arrival, of loss, each narrative adding color to the communal tapestry Ruth Deming had encouraged. Henry and Sam adjusted to life in the half-light between notoriety and admiration. Some students, emboldened, asked about the discovery and the records. Others, still wary, lapsed into old patterns, keeping their distance for fear the Ferris boys might bring more trouble. Sam in particular struggled. He missed the simplicity of before, but Henry helped him find pride in their quest, reminding him that sometimes the right path leads through difficult terrain. For Lily, the changes were less complex. She drew every day, fields, wells, houses, always with connecting lines, each figure and structure now alive with names and faces she'd learned to recognize. Her teachers praised her creativity, and her pictures began to decorate not only the Ferris home, but also the walls of the town library and even the general store, a gentle testament to what remembrance could offer. Despite this, shadows lingered. The sheriff, having played an ambiguous role, grew more reserved, aware that the story his badge once silenced was now part of Idle Springs' folklore. The merchant, still resentful of lost authority and wary of outsiders, cut back on his visits and his gossip. The balance of the town had shifted. Old wounds left some unsettled, others eager for more change. Through it all, the Ferris family remained united. They repaired fences, widened the garden, and welcomed those seeking advice on tracing their own roots. Sometimes the phantom knock of a branch in the night, or the hush before a thunderstorm, would summon memories of the months just ended. Thomas or Martha would sit awake, hearts braced, but nothing perilous ever followed. The worst had already come, and they had endured. One afternoon, Ruth Deming visited with a parcel, a copy of a newspaper from out east. "Look here," she said, pointing to an article. "Ferris family of Idle Springs helps restore lost Kentucky history." The headline, bold and unfamiliar beside the somber columns on crops and cattle, triggered pride and humility in equal measure. Thomas read the article out loud at dinner, the family listening as if their tale now belonged as much to the wider world as to Idle Springs itself. That evening, a knock came at the door, not in storm or secrecy, but in sunlight, carried by a gentle, expectant hush. At the threshold stood a granddaughter of the Hartfields, traveling from Cincinnati after reading of the events. She carried a single photograph, her great-aunt Maud, unmistakable from the one recovered from the Ferris' well, smiling in a sunlit garden just months before her disappearance. She wept as she traced her fingers across the grave marker, thanking the Ferrises for what they'd restored. Through the summer, more visitors arrived, some with ties to the Cooks and Lowens, others simply wanting to witness a place where the past had been honored instead of hidden. The Ferris home became a kind of crossroads, a waypoint where stories converged, were shared, and were finally allowed to heal. Idle Springs grew, not in size, but in spirit. Families began to pool history. Traditions long kept private, old recipes, songs, even games, re-emerged at church socials and fairs. The land bloomed, harvests improved, and people spoke, sometimes for the first time, with the comfort of those unburdened by unspeakable things. Of course, not every wound was mended. A handful of bitter families grumbled about outsiders, about change come too quickly or not enough, but their resistance softened with each season, their voices fading into the larger chorus that had chosen healing over silence. The Ferrises, once marked by unease, now shaped the rhythm of hope. They learned that the story was less about exposing villains than about refusing again to disappear. They would not be dictated by fear or erasure ever again. As the first fireflies of summer blinked above the fields, Thomas stood beside the well, child on one shoulder, memory in the other. He realized finally that history was not a chain binding them to suffering, but a path winding forward, a trail marked by truths, burdens, and the hard-earned comfort of belonging. And for the Ferris family and for everyone in Idle Springs, it was only the beginning. Summer ended, painting Idle Springs with gold and russet, the Ferris property ripening into its own gentle monument. The farm's fields glowed beneath wide Kentucky skies, no longer heavy with secret or suspicion. A season and a story had shifted. What began as a knock in the storm now echoed as renewal, woven into the marrow of every routine. The Ferris family moved forward, changed but not shattered. Thomas walked the property each morning, boots sinking in forgiving soil, his gaze softer as he surveyed crops restored and fences rebuilt. For the first time in years, he felt the land was truly theirs, not just in title but in truth. Sometimes he paused near the old well, a small plaque now standing beside it. "May all who suffered here be remembered. Let no story be lost to silence again." He touched it gently, grateful and reverent, then continued his rounds. Martha became a local steward of memory, teaching at church and at home, helping others preserve the lineage of vanished families. She led sewing circles where women shared not just patterns, but ancestry and wisdom. Her kitchen, scented always of coffee and rising dough, became central to the town's gentle awakening. With each visitor, each shared letter, she stitched the Ferris' past into a wider blanket of belonging. Henry and Sam, no longer merely boys defined by calamity, grew restless for new challenges. They learned carpentry from Cora Lawson's cousins and were part of the team that built benches and repairs in the schoolhouse, a gift to a new generation. Sam, once so anxious, made peace with the notion that justice meant more than retribution. It meant responsibility, keeping vigilance so others would never be erased. Henry spoke at the Remembrance Festival that October, telling children, "The truth isn't old or new, it just waits for someone honest enough to find it." Lily flourished. Her drawings framed in the library, her stories read aloud in class. She came home one afternoon waving a ribbon, awarded for a picture of 3 houses, and one well beneath a radiant yellow sky, each house named after the families lost and found. She told Martha, "They're all here with us now. No one's gone for good if we remember." In the months that followed, Idle Springs' graveyard, once overgrown and avoided, became tranquil ground. Church members and children tidied the stones, planted wildflowers and recited the names aloud. At the new memorial, strangers sometimes gathered, descendants, townsfolk, historians tracing a map of hope out of what had once been a wound. The Ferris family, marked as troublemakers by some and guardians by most, learned to accept both. They opened the farmhouse for autumn socials, story night by lamplight, families sharing food and pasts with equal generosity. It was not only justice that survived, but friendship, even among those who once shunned the touch of change. Even opposition softened with time. The old sheriff, attending services in the back pew, nodded as Thomas passed. Their old unease transformed into mutual understanding. Cora Lawson, who'd warned Martha to let sleeping things rest, thanked her for courage to stir them. "Sometimes," she said, "waking the past is the only way to make sure the future is wide enough for all." In late winter, a letter arrived from the county office. The last Hartfield, now living in St. Louis, thanked the Ferrises for returning what no court could have, an unbroken legacy, a plot of earth, a lineage now visible once again on every page of the Somerset archives. Ruth Deming, now frail, pressed her hand atop the letter and wept, content that her work could sleep alongside her someday, honored by those who came after. On the anniversary of their first awful night, the Ferrises hosted a candle-lit walk from the church to the well, remembering the knock in the night, not as a tale of horror or shame, but as a turning. Reverend Mayfield led prayers for generations lost, and for those finally brought home by story and resolve. As each candle was placed along the path, the darkness shrunk and faded, replaced by something enduring, light shared and multiplied, hope swelling in each simple act of remembrance. In the quiet after the crowd dispersed, Thomas and Martha stood hand in hand, gazing past fields and gravestones, listening to the hush that years ago had threatened to suffocate. Now each silence was filled with laughter, with stories, with the certainty that they had chosen not only to survive, but to heal. And so the Ferris family, tethered forever to Kentucky's land and to the names they reclaimed, carried forward. They discovered that the file kept hidden from history is only ever lost until someone dares to open it. They had done so, and in doing so turned agony to meaning, and the final page to invitation. Remember, speak, shine light, always, so nothing precious, and no one loved, is ever erased again. Every family hides secrets, some so dark they should never see the light of day. Here, we open the doors to those shadowed pasts, uncovering hidden crimes, silent pacts, and stories that echo like ghosts through the halls of memory. If you've made it this far, it means you also carry that forbidden curiosity. So don't hesitate. Subscribe to the channel now, turn on the bell, and follow our next revelations. Because every day, new secrets emerge, and only those who dare to face the truth remain to hear them.